Pirates of the Caribbean is perhaps one of the most successful, completely new and original movies released in the new millennium. With only a theme park attraction as loose inspiration, The Curse of the Black Pearl managed to take what seemed to be a tired concept and turned it into one of the most popular franchises in recent history. But, even disregarding the quality of its sequels, that can lead some to ask, is it really that good of a movie? And what is it about Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, that makes seemingly everybody love it so much? And today, I'd like to try and answer both those questions, to the best of my ability. And obviously there will be spoilers for this movie ahead, so in case you somehow don't know what happens and don't want to find out, you might want to come back to this video another day. Alright, so to start off simply, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl was a first for Disney in a few different ways. With one being that it was their first movie, live action or animated, to be released under the official Walt Disney banner that was rated PG-13, which, at the time it came out, was actually a pretty bold move for the company, since they were always insistent on maintaining their family-friendly image. And for another thing, and as I briefly noted, this was also the first movie of theirs to be based on one of their theme park attractions, since up until that point, it was generally understood that the parks and their various rides existed mainly to promote the movies, TV shows, and other entertainment branches. But this time, they were taking the whole thing in the opposite direction, basing the movie off of a ride instead. To put it simply, many aspects of this movie were uncharted territory for the Disney company, making it a pretty big gamble that just happened to pay off. But despite everything that was seemingly stacked against it, it's really little wonder why the final product was so successful. Now, the first thing to usually be praised is Johnny Depp's legendary performance as Captain Jack Sparrow, and very deservingly so. Because even if everything else had been exactly the same, it probably wouldn't have done as well without Depp's unorthodox input on the character. Since Sparrow is a complete wild card, he functions perfectly as both an unlikely ally and an enemy just waiting to reveal himself. And the ending is particularly genius in how this uncertainty plays out. Because after keeping everybody guessing as to which side he's actually on the entire time, he manages to save the day by evoking the curse on himself to save Elizabeth and William, and then gets William to fall in line to lift the curse just at the right moment. Really, the payoff of Jack's redemption cannot be overstated, because Depp makes the character so likable that the audience hopes and prays to see him join the good guys by the time it's over. And he does so in one of the most spectacular ways possible. But in the acting department, some credit must also be given to Geoffrey Rush as Captain Barbossa. Because Barbossa is a good example of a sympathetic villain done right. Because even though you're inclined to feel sorry for him, and even view his death as tragic, there's still no denying that he's an evil man that deserves to die the villain. Because while he may be charismatic, entertaining, and terrifying in equal measure, he's still a traitor, has very little morals, and isn't above doing pretty much anything to get what he wants. As both he and the crew even point out, it was his own greed and evil nature that got them cursed in the first place. So again, while it's impossible not to feel some sympathy for him because of what the curse does to him, there's still no question that he's the bad guy. But where he also works perfectly as the villain is that he's very smart, to the point that Jack is only able to fool him at the very end when he seemingly has nothing to gain by turning on him, as well as charismatic in spite of his more evil deeds. To put it simply, the guy is a huge jerk, but he's a huge jerk that's very fun to watch. Most of the time, anyway. And finally, the fact that he's infinitely worse than Jack only makes Sparrow look even more heroic and sympathetic by comparison, which, as I got into in my video on villains, which you can find a link in the description to, is a very important job of any good bad guy. But speaking of Jack Sparrow and Barbossa, another thing this movie does right is that it has all the hallmarks of a classic pirate story. In many ways, it even harkens back to the classic novel Treasure Island, where one pirate is put in a better light compared to all the other, much more murderous and traitorous pirates, and even gets to escape in the end for saving the life of the main character. Though, obviously, what helps in this case is that Sparrow isn't nearly as bad as Long John Silver, but the point still stands. Because simply put, audiences love a good pirate story. That's why the golden age of Hollywood was full of them, and even why Robert Louis Stevenson wrote Treasure Island in the first place. As I got into in my video on classic literature, which you can also find a link in the description to, Stevenson actually notes at the beginning of the book that pirate stories are what people want, so that's what he's going to give them. And one of the best decisions they made with The Curse of the Black Pearl was telling a typical pirate story instead of trying to do something different with the template. Really, the place where they deviate the most from that is arguably with Jack Sparrow himself. And as I noted before, that was definitely all to the good and a change worth making. And in a similar vein, another smart thing they did was in how they handled the supernatural aspects of the story. Because in a day and age where new concepts are seemingly few and far between, it's not all that uncommon to see writers just take normal cliches and try and make them interesting by adding science fiction or fantasy elements to them. But what makes Pirates of the Caribbean different in this regard mainly comes down to two things. The first of which is that pirate movies were no stranger to having fantasy elements to them, as many a movie from the golden age of Hollywood has proven. But that also goes back long before movies were a thing, with many otherwise normal pirate or sea stories diving headfirst into science fiction with some of the things they encounter. But the other reason is because the curse doesn't take over the entire story. Sure, lifting it is the entire motivation behind the pirate's actions, but the movie isn't really about the curse and is more just a means to an end. To put it simply, this movie is a pirate movie first and a fantasy film second, and that's exactly what it should have been. In fact, one of the sequel's biggest problems was that it arguably started focusing too much on the fantasy over typical pirate stuff. To put it another way, The Curse of the Black Pearl was a lot like Indiana Jones in the way it handled the supernatural, because the fantasy elements in both are much more of an underlying aspect to them, with the focus being placed a lot more on the action those elements cause rather than the elements themselves. As in, The Curse of the Black Pearl, just like the Indiana Jones series, uses the supernatural as a reason to tell a pirate story. Because once again, all the elements typically associated with pirates are present here, to the point that the movie pretty much makes for a modern retelling of the classic pirate stories. And the best thing they did was holding back on how much the curse played into that story. Again, it only serves as a motivation for the villains and as an obstacle for the characters to overcome. But other than that, this movie is most definitely a pirate movie and is proud of it. And there are other things I could obviously bring up as well, such as the perfect depiction of both William and Elizabeth as the two unambiguously good characters swept up in a pirate's adventure. And really, Elizabeth's characterization in particular is perfect here. As a writer myself, I honestly think they couldn't have done a better job. Though by the same token, William is just as good as your average person who must answer the call to adventure, save the woman he loves, and through it all clings to what he knows is right the entire time. And really, the fact that he's able to learn something from Jack, while still most definitely being a good person, is another thing that's really done well. So, to put it simply, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl, was a very well-made movie overall and made pretty much every narrative choice correctly, especially when it comes to being a classic pirate movie. And because it lived up to everything it promised the audience it would be, and arguably even more so, it's really no wonder why most view it as a classic of the new millennium. Alright, I think that pretty much ends this video. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that the original Pirates of the Caribbean is so well liked because it knew how to be a pirate movie before anything else? Or do you think it was for other reasons that the movie is so beloved? Please let me know in the comments below. And as I always say, you do not have to agree with this video if you don't want to. You can feel about Pirates of the Caribbean and anything else brought up that you want to, and if you think I had it all wrong, that's completely fine. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.